Imagine running for office is a lot of work and kind of scary. Every now and then, I open up this book and I look at this picture right here, which is the Parliament. It's an example and a reminder of where I want to go, where I want to end up.
Phil DeLuna is our candidate in Toronto St. Paul's, and a shining example of what we hope to bring to Ottawa in terms of green MPs. Phil was the youngest ever director at the National Research Council, and if elected, he would be the first Filipino man from Ontario sent to our parliament. He took 6 months off in order to present himself as our candidate. He is an extraordinary person, an incredibly thoughtful person with groundbreaking ideas, particularly around the climate. And so, as I said before, take a look and see who's running in your community for the Greens. I think you'll find someone extraordinary, someone incredibly committed to the community, and that would be a compelling voice for your community in Ottawa.
My name is Phil DeLuna. I am a scientist and a clean tech innovator. I earned a PhD from the University of Toronto in materials science and engineering. I became a finalist in the Carbon X Prize, a $20 million competition to capture and convert the most CO2 into a useful product. I became the youngest ever director at the National Research Council, where I led a $57 million program to develop new technologies to decarbonize Canada. I know exactly what it takes to get to this net zero future.
This is exactly why we have to invest now, and why the Greens are committed to a just recovery and a just transition, ensuring that every single oil and gas job would be replaced by a high-paying green job. And we have to remember that oil and gas is a cyclical industry. It's boom and bust. It's not consistent. These aren't good jobs. They're hard jobs. They're jobs that aren't very safe. But green jobs are consistent. They are the future. This is the economy of the 21st century. So how will the Greens get us there? We will invest in retraining programs, in wage insurance, and early retirement plans to ensure that there is no family left behind. Will we stop all fossil fuel subsidies? Absolutely, immediately. And that's how we're going to pay for these retraining programs.
I don't see it how it's not a subsidy. In looking at the West Coast environmental law analysis, they point out that $12.6 billion is being spent on the construction, and that hundreds of millions of dollars more are going to be spent on trying to deal with all the delays taking place for various reasons, including for environmental breaches. Now, that said, the subsidy in my submission is something that's going on here because we don't really see realistically this being sold at any time. Who's going to buy it? Under what terms? And are the people that are going to buy it, are they going to be interested in making a profit? How can it be a profit? What we have here is, I think, something to look at what's called a stranded asset. Stranded assets are something that are going to be taking place around the world. And what's going to happen with this pipeline is it's going to become a stranded asset in that at some point, it's going to not be functioning because we must stop the use of fossil fuels. If it's only going to last for 20 or 30 years, as Jonathan has indicated, it's going to be a stranded asset in 30 years. Now, the current pipeline, the one that's still operating, it's been around for much longer. So this stranded asset in 20 to 30 years is going to shut right down and be of no value to anyone buying it. What we need to do here is stop the pipeline right now, and it's definitely being subsidized by the people of this country, and it's a tragedy.
So today, let's take that message home. If we want to avoid more of this, then we have got to do those three simple things as soon as possible. No new pipelines, no more fracking, and no more oil and gas exploration. And so absolutely the future of Canada is in energy. We can and should remain an energy superpower, but we're talking about renewable energy and not fossil fuel energy. Greenland the other day, when they announced that they would stop all oil and gas exploration and leave hundreds of millions of barrels untapped, they said that their future was in energy as well, but it was in renewable energy. And so for oil and gas workers, what I want you to know is that the jobs in the green sector pay more. These are jobs that are directly transferable with the skills that you have. And these are jobs where in the United States, almost half of the people who are employed had nothing more than a high school diploma. So these are jobs that have a secure future, they're safer, and they let you get home to your family at the end of the day. So we are thinking about you when we talk about economic diversification. Please don't let the other political parties wait until it's too late. Let's get started now in the way that other countries have. I must say that it always perplexes me why this isn't the story for all of the parties, because Alberta is actually front of the line for the advantages of a green economy. Solar power, wind power, geothermal power, the incredibly talented and incredibly well-educated workforce that is out in Alberta. Alberta could be and should be the juggernaut in Canada for the green economy, and it can be. So this is the moment again for political parties to think beyond this election cycle and to think about the future. And as I said, to remain laser focused on the people of Alberta, people like my brother who want a future and who we can't afford to leave behind, not even, for a second. Of commonality, we have areas of collaboration, we have areas of cooperation between parties, and let's stop pretending that we don't. Let's do things for people in Canada. As you can see here, each one of these policies has been passed by the respective members of the respective parties. Guaranteed livable income, universal pharmacare, long-term care reform, respect and implementation of the calls for justice from the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Report, and a just transition for oil and gas workers. All of these extraordinary priorities, all of these that we agree on. 2 years is enough time to get this done if you have the will to do it.
If there's a will to do it, we can accomplish all these objectives. We have the votes, we have the mandate of our members, and we have a mandate from Canadians as well.
Mr. Blanchette.
Thank you to be with us, sir. I hope you appreciate a little bit blunt answers. First, you put a ceiling on any production of oil and gas. You take all the money that the federal government is placing into that industry, even more by the Liberals than the Conservatives before, and you put that into green energy. And you take the money for Trans Mountain and you give it to Alberta for Alberta to initiate its own transition toward a greener economy. This is the way to do things, because if we don't do that and keep dreaming about reducing gas emission while increasing production, we will never get there.
Well, Trans Mountain repeatedly points out throughout its evidence, throughout its argument, that tankers leaving the Westridge terminal are not their responsibility nor under their control. Clearly, pipelines are directly their business and directly in their control. With over 116 at least salmon-bearing crossings in BC alone, and that's admitted by Trans Mountain at page 305 of their final argument, and particularly the Fraser River and its critical importance for so many different salmon runs. Any pipeline accident, such as the one which actually occurred in Kalamazoo, Michigan, under Enbridge's control, could have devastating impacts. In this cross-examination of Trans Mountain's confidence in its own record, despite the numerous accidents that have been reported in which the City of Vancouver final argument makes very clear are relevant, but its reliance on its detection systems, early warnings, bells, whistles, alarms, technology will make sure that pipelines don't fail. Now that, by the way, is referred to at page 147 of Trans Mountain's final argument, how much they rely on the great technology to warn them that make it almost impossible to imagine a serious pipeline accident. So the reason I submitted in my evidence the report of the U.S., I mean, it's really the U.S. the Transportation Safety Board accident report on the Kalamazoo, Michigan spill. I recommend it to you as individual panel commissioners to read this. To read, it's not just one example of human error. It's a catalog. When this was released, the press release and the comments from the U.S. agencies that reviewed this were that Enbridge had a culture of negligence. And part of a culture of negligence comes from extreme confidence in your technology and a kind of complacency that comes from that. So sure enough, I mean, when the pipeline broke in Michigan, the bells and whistles all worked. There were 20-minute alarms ringing in headquarters, in the control booth. And the technology people there, the engineers, the people running Enbridge's pipeline, looked at the bells and the whistles and heard the alarms. And just like as if we were at home and we had a piece of toast stuck in the toaster and it set off the alarm in the house, they went around switching off the alarms because they concluded, well, there's a pressure drop because we were testing the pipeline, so there's nothing wrong here. Our equipment is malfunctioning. One shift went home, the next shift showed up. The first shift never told the second shift they'd had alarms. 81% of the bitumen and diluent that contaminates the Kalamazoo River to this day, 81% of that spill occurred after the alarms.
This is about making sure that the people of Canada who work in the oil and gas sector have a future. We all remember, that's not true, I'm dating myself. I remember when the cod fisheries collapsed out east. And I remember that up until the last second, we had government officials and we had private corporations telling us everything's fine, no alarm bells here. And then communities were devastated for good.
There is much at stake. In 2008, my father lost his job at Ford during the Great Recession at the fall of the automotive industry. I know exactly what it's like to grow up in a community that is dependent on one industry and what happens when that industry fades away.
I love questions about the green recovery and our green future. I'm always ready to answer those. Actually, at my launch the other day, I didn't get to introduce all of my family who had come, but my brother was there, and my brother, until about halfway through the second wave of the pandemic, was working as a roughneck out on the oil crews in Alberta. And then his job disappeared. And we know all about that boom and bust cycle out in Alberta. We know that economic diversification is the way of the future. We know that we have reached, for many different reasons, the peak decade for oil out in Alberta. And so whenever we talk about this and whenever I talk about it, I'm thinking about my brother and the people that served on his crew. I'm thinking about their communities, and I'm thinking about how many times successive governments have let them down and have promised the moon and said that this is going to go on forever, and then it all falls apart and the communities fall apart and they get displaced. And I only have to say, remember what happened out east to the cod fisheries. So this is the time to diversify. This is the time absolutely to invest billions of dollars into Alberta, into green technology, into green infrastructure, into the jobs of the future. They pay more. They're immediately transferable. They're more sustainable. They get you home to your family at the end of the day. They're safer. These are the jobs of the future for Albertans. And they have said in polling, they have said they know that there's no conflict between the climate and the economy. So any government at any level that is thinking laser focused on the people of Alberta is going to be talking about the greatest economic opportunity of our lifetime, and that is a green recovery and a green economy.
I know exactly what it takes to go from discovery to market. My job is to go from innovation to impact. I know how much time and money we need to invest in the next generation of clean technologies, the next generation that will decarbonize our world and our society. We have heard what will happen if we do not decarbonize. We are experiencing today heat waves and forest fires. But I want to take the opportunity to talk about this transition in a different light. The opportunity that it represents for Canada. How Canada can lead and become the superpower in the green economy of the future.
The problem with the Liberal plan is essentially that they still have the unfortunate Trans Mountain Pipeline as part of what they call funding the green revolution. There's no logic in this. The lack of logic in that feature alone, in my view, is the basis upon which to consider the Liberal plan as unlikely to succeed. And the green approach is that we stop all carbon producing production of natural gas as well as oil, as promptly as possible. And to engage in that particular step, we have to, first of all, shut down the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Absolutely essential in any kind of meaningful climate change policy. It's apparent that the gold standard for climate change policies from Great Britain, where they passed a law in 2008, within which they are currently aiming for a 78% reduction of greenhouse gases by 2035. That truly is progress. We don't have that kind of progress in mind by the Liberals. The Liberals have a history of not succeeding with respect to these kinds of plans, and it's my view that it's not appropriate to consider them as an alternative.
There is a global green rush going on now to create the competitive green economy of the future. What the Greens don't want to see is Canada being left behind, because that is exactly what's happening. You know, I'm sure that the last candle maker was the person that had the market cornered on candle making. But if everyone has moved on to LED lights, then you're in trouble. And so what we want to see is us seizing this opportunity. And Mercedes, to your earlier question, if Denmark and Greenland, other cold countries, can end oil exploration, then certainly we can do it. And if 27 countries in the European Union can come together collaboratively to have an ambitious plan for the climate, then surely with leadership, we can do the same here in Canada. I know Canada can do anything that any other country can do. Or you can demand more.
Government can encourage this by taking away subsidies and really working to end industrial livestock operations, which are horrific on so many levels, but significantly, as you mentioned at the beginning, Holly, is about the third largest source of greenhouse gases after oil and gas and transportation. And we must move quickly to ensure that we respond to the climate emergency before it makes the planet uninhabitable.
Before I answer the question, I just want to thank Dr. Tila Johnson for such a wonderful talk. 3 years ago, I became vegetarian precisely to lower my own carbon footprint, and I haven't looked back since. I've actually lost weight and gotten healthier, so it's been fantastic. And specifically with food systems, the biggest driver for emissions in agriculture are monoculture farms and large industrial farms, because what they're doing is typically you end up losing your root systems where the soil can actually capture and sequester CO2. So one of the first things that we should do is promote regenerative agriculture practices in all of our agriculture and farming across Canada. And that's really on the production side of things. Another thing we can do is tackle consumption. Of course, individually, we can all become vegetarian, which would be really important, but also we could try to shorten supply chains and create local food hubs, which will not only help for more locally sourced and lower emissions, because we don't have to worry about transportation emissions from place to place, but it will also help the Canadian economy. The majority of the food that we produce in Canada gets shipped off as exports overseas. We don't yet have as much refining or production and value-added production of raw food materials into things that we eat. So the Greens would want to increase Canada's dependency on domestic production, so replace 1/3 of Canada's food imports with domestic production, which would bring $15 billion back into our economy. And we can do this by investing in value-added food production and local community food hubs across the country.
We talked the other day about our green future. We talked the other day about the fact that climate change is here. Climate change has arrived. We see it in the hundreds of forest fires that are burning across the country. We see it in the hundreds, and the number continues to mount. The over 600 Canadians who lost their lives in just 3 days during the heat dome that settled in British Columbia. We see it in the floods. We see it in the historic drought that has settled on the prairies that is withering crops in the field. And so we know that climate change is real, that climate change is here, and that we must act with determination, with ambition, and as quickly as possible with the tools that we have and the tools that we will create.
We have discovered, as part of the farming population, how to build soil, not just organic matter, but soil at the rate of almost 1 inch a year. When we use our system properly, and where I think this question wants an answer, is doing that extension across North America, and it is already happening. In Canada, it takes on average 500 years 500 years to make 1 inch of topsoil. On our farm, we're making it at almost 1 inch a year, and we're just one teeny tiny little farm. There are thousands of farms across North America that are using the same techniques that we're using to draw down and capture and hold carbon. We can do this.
Ms. May?
Yeah, Holly, if I may, I just wanted to say on the climate crisis, we have to make common cause with the agricultural community. There's a tremendous potential in soil for carbon sequestration. If we move to a regenerative model, particularly, and I saw someone in the chat saying there's no regenerative animal agriculture, but let's make sure that we're paying farmers to help them sequester soil carbon in the soils, help them rebuild stuff that Harper got rid of, like the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Act, to make sure that we're more drought resistant, that we've got hedgerows. We're looking at it, the farmers in this country right now are going through hell on earth. They can't grow things. The drought is punishing. I mean, the heat wave and the BC being on fire this summer. I don't know what's wrong with the leaders of the other parties, sorry, for not focusing on the climate crisis and as the number one issue.
We have to remember that what has been accomplished through cooperation has been tremendous. If people are proud of our Medicare system, please remember that it was one political party who developed it during their term, another political party who introduced it in the House of Commons, and all political parties who voted for it. If we are proud of our Canada Pension Plan, let us remember that that was a plan that was developed and passed during a minority parliament. So good things happen when we cooperate and collaborate together, and we should never forget that. And I will continue to say that no matter how many times people tell me I should only be emphasizing the things that separate us. There are important things that separate parties. There are important differences, in our case, particularly on our approach to the climate and how important climate action is. But there are things in common. There is common ground. Canada is going to have going forward in terms of currency is its word. When we make a promise, we have to keep those promises. That's how, when we need help, we get it. You know, my mom grew up on a farm in a small community, and she learned very young and taught us that you have to give your word to your neighbors, and they have to be able to count on it so that when you need help, they're there for you. And so when we don't show up, when we're asked for vaccines from COVAX, and then we take vaccines from COVAX, when the Uyghur ask us for help to declare a genocide and we don't do that, when we don't show up on the climate by setting targets that are ambitious, but at the same time in line with our international partners and do our fair share, then our word doesn't count for much, and then it makes it very hard for us to help people like the Michaels when they need us the most. Reconciliation is treated like a buffet. You can opt in for this, pick this plate, but not the other one. And that applies to what we've seen with Mr. Trudeau and the Liberals. You can't, on the one hand, say reconciliation and then go and not allow Mi'kmaq fishers to be able to have a decent, moderate living for all of these years. You can't call reconciliation and then take Indigenous peoples to court. But Mr. Singh, you also can't say reconciliation and then support the NDP government in putting pipelines through Indigenous territories, or support Line 5 after the Anishinaabe made it very clear that they did not support that project.
Ms. Paul.
Unfortunately, Canada at this moment has the second lowest investment in research and development, the second lowest in the G7. We know that innovation is an engine for our economy. We know that the countries that invest the most in innovation are the ones that are going to be the most competitive in the future. I said it before, and I will say it again. We are in a global green rush. There was a gold rush, and now there's a green rush. Every country is positioning themselves to be at the head of that green rush, to have the strongest green economy, focused on renewable energy and on research and innovation to get us over the finish line. So if we want to stay competitive in that green rush, we need to do it now, and we need to invest in it. And with that, I'm going to seize the greatest economic opportunity that Canada has seen within our lifetimes. We are being left behind. And if the United States can do it, if the European Union can do it, I know that we can do it. It's about a change in the culture.
All right, thank you, Ms. Paul.
Now, you know, I recognize that there are those, well, I know, I've heard it, I've had the questions, you know, why are you emphasizing the things, Annemie, that your party has in common with others? Well, my point is there is common ground. There is common ground on policies that matter, and many of our most cherished social programs came about through cooperation and collaboration, and often in minority governments. So let's stop pretending that we have nothing in common on the issues that matter most to people in Canada. There are lots of things that we disagree on, the climate being the number one, but there are areas of commonality, so let's get back to work. We had 2 years in order to get this work done. Let's get back to work as soon as possible and finish this unfinished business.